Welcome to CareyBrosPros, the podcast for construction pros by construction pros, because your client satisfaction is the best paycheck. Now, here are James and Morris Carey.
Absolutely, and we are professional contractors, and believe it or not, brothers. Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Morris. On this edition of CareyBrosPros, we'll be talking lumber. It is our pleasure to welcome Dena Cordova Jack, who is the Executive Vice President of the Mountain States Lumber Dealers Association. Welcome, Dena.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be on the phone with you all.
Thank you. So for folks that don't know what the Mountain States Lumber Dealers Association is or what it does, tell us, please.
Sure. Mountain States Lumber Dealers Association was founded in 1891, and the reason for our existence is we are a legislative advocacy group for the lumber and timber industry, as well as an educational outreach. We do a lot of education for the folks in our industry, anything from blueprint and estimating training to yard foreman workshops and sales training.
Wow.
Cool.
I mean, I guess that your members primarily consist of lumber dealers, mills. Would that be right? Mills, dealers, folks that buy and sell lumber?
Yes, people that buy and sell lumber. So we have lumber dealers, and we have the independents on up to the bigger operations, such as the BMCs of the world. And so we have a very good mix of membership. We cover 5 states: Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Wyoming. And we also are a advocacy group for the distributors of the world, so the mills and the distributors. So it's the whole supply chain that get our building materials from point A to all the way to the end user.
Wow.
I'm dying to know how the lumber industry has changed over the past few decades. Can you help us with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say a couple of the biggest things that we are facing in terms of the lumber industry in the last 3 decades in particular, I'd say is how we harvest our timber and the environmental concerns that we have. Those of us who've been in the industry for quite a while remember the situation during the Clinton administration when a lot of the forests in the Pacific Northwest were basically shut down because of the spotted owl crisis.
Do you guys still have a recipe for spotted owl soup?
I still have a picture of the little, instead of the hamburger helper, it was the spotted owl helper. If you probably remember that. But yeah, it was really rough.
I wonder if Americans really know how many people were put out of work. And I mean all over the great Northwest. Thousands of people were put out of work because of the spotted owl. That just breaks my heart.
It was, and it forever changed the way that we harvest timber. Now, there's some good that's come out of that. I mean, clear cutting in terms of how we used to harvest timber is no longer in existence. The reforestation plan, in terms of, like, example, in the Pacific Northwest, I know in Oregon, Washington, for every tree that you harvest, you have to plant 6, and you have to be able to sustain those new growth for, a certain number of years. And so as we look at the trees and how we harvest timber today, there is actually more trees that are growing in the Pacific Northwest than there were back in the 70s and 80s before these new forest practices and harvesting took place. But we still, the Farm Bill, which kind of encompasses the harvesting practices of the timber in the United States, is on the table for renegotiation. And I know that our administration now is really working hard to, open up our forests for harvest, because the United States, the way that we harvest timber today, we cannot sustain the demand that we have for our housing. Hence a lot of the high, timber prices that we're seeing now. And it's escalated out of control.
When I was doing research on this issue, I found that Native Americans, American Indians, used to burn forests on purpose to clear them of the undergrowth so that there would be plenty of light in the forest for the trees to grow. And it would seem to me that clear cutting was a method of doing the same thing And I don't think people really ever understood the importance of clear cutting to the future of a forest. I just don't get it.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that today that, and you're right, the Native Americans did do that. They understood the value of burning the forest and getting that carbon back into the soil for the trees to be able to grow better. And it's really interesting to see that now that these days that's not allowed. But more to the point is that the federal government, in this current legislative environment that we're in, they want to be able to have the charge for managing our forests. Our intent is that, hey, we're here, we know the situation in our forests. Turn that over to the states. Let them manage their forests the best way that they know how, because the species are different. The entire situation in every state is different. So we need to be able to have the resources to manage our forests, because as we all know and we've seen over the last few years, the incidents of forest fires are decimating.
Yeah,
I understood. We visited Simpson Lumber some years back and went through some of their forests, and the bottom line was that the government wasn't allowing clear cutting of redwood forests, and therefore it made it nearly impossible to grow new redwood trees because they require so much sunlight. And under the canopy of the existing trees, you couldn't get redwood seedling to grow.
That's correct. The saplings, yes.
Yeah, Dena, you mentioned that the demand is outpacing the production of lumber in the U.S. Does any lumber come from outside the country?
Absolutely, it does. That's another thing that's really affecting the housing market and the lumber market as it stands today, is that right now the United States, with the demand that we have, and we are still nowhere near the housing demand that we had pre-recession, so with the housing starts. And so the mills, they cannot keep up in the United States side with the demand that we are currently seeing. So Canada, our wonderful neighbor to the north, currently as it stands, we import about 30% of our softwood lumber, the 2x4s, 2x6s, what we use to build houses, from that country. And on top of what's happening with their situation in their land, they've got right now in British Columbia, they have 56 fires burning. And they also are struggling the entire country with the pine beetle infestation. And so we're looking at these two things, which are decimating that timber, which affects what we can import into the United States. And then on top of that, then we have from a legislative perspective, the softwood lumber agreement, which, as you probably are aware of, has been going on for the last 3 decades. Right now, we're in the situation to where we're trying to resolve that, because Canada, the United States, has imposed huge tariffs on Canadian lumber that's being imported into the United States. And it's artificially driving the commodities market in the U.S. for lumber. And as long as I've been in the industry, which has been since 1990, I was a commodities trader for a number of years at Georgia Pacific, and I don't think I've seen anything like this. So one of the things that my association, and there are 12 of us across the United States, that we work with an association in Washington, D.C., that we are lobbying so hard for, is a resolution to this SLA so that we can see our lumber prices modulate.
We're based in Northern California, where we've been hit so hard by wildfires, and several parts of the U.S. as well, and not to mention all of the hurricanes and floods and all of that. So how is this impacting the U.S. lumber industry?
More than anything, I'd say from the availability perspective, I hear in my travels around the United States, I hear from dealers who they are awaiting carloads, truckloads of lumber. They simply can't get that. The trucking and the rail situation is it's overburdened. There's not enough labor to go around. And so they will place an order for a carload of lumber. And sometimes they might be waiting 6 or 8 weeks, especially in the wides where there's not, the log decks they're just not as existent as they used to be. So it's getting harder and harder to get the wider dimension lumber. But regardless, on the 2x4 and 2x6, which is the bread and butter of what we use to build, I mean, they could be waiting weeks to get this. And then secondly, they are paying record high prices. Now, we've seen that crack just a little bit, but the long-term outlook for that in terms of, if we don't have a resolution to the SLA, and if we keep getting hit with a lot of these natural disasters, it's just going to further impact the availability of the log decks to keep manufacturing going.
So we have to pass these high prices on to our customers. Yeah. Any advice?
Correct.
What do we do? Just warn them that lumber is ridiculously expensive, or is there something that we can do to keep the cost down? Or
well, I would say that at this point, what I'm starting to see, and I think a lot of the dealers are seeing this, is the rise of some alternative building products. So you might see some advent of manufactured studs in your market might start to kind of make themselves known. You know, I've always been the steel stud market has always been a lot higher than utilizing basic lumber, but right now that shoe is a little bit on the other foot. But the manufactured lumber, in terms of like the glue lamps, and we all use I-joists now instead of 2x10s to build our floors and so on and so forth.
LVLs.
But, yeah, a lot of these manufacturers are coming up with alternative building products. And I think if we are unable to resolve some of these issues in terms of the supply chain, we're going to continue to see that. And then if I were a lumberyard and, you know, looking at buying, because you were buying at that time, you're buying carloads, hundreds of thousands of dollars of lumber at a time. And, you know, it's a little scary to do that right now. And so it's, you know, it's really playing it close to the vest. And so I can give you an example here in Denver. The price of a median home has just passed $500,000 for the first time in the history of the state. And I know that California, that's probably peanuts to California because the prices just keep escalating. But I would say, as far as, you know, for your remodelers, don't be afraid to look at some alternative building products because they're out there and they are starting to surface more and more. So it's not exactly the most popular thing that you're going to see right now, but they are there. So don't be afraid to do a little research on that.
So, Dena, you're a woman living in a man's world as regards to the industry that you're in. Traditionally, it's been male-dominated, construction in general, and, of course, building materials. If you visit one of the trade shows, you'll find that that's not the case anymore. There are increasingly more women involved in all categories across building products and technology. But we understand that there are an increasing number of women in the lumber industry and that you have something called a Women's Leadership Roundtable. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. This is my 27th year in the industry, and when I started, it was unusual. I was an unusual thing to be seen, especially on a commodity trading floor. And as the years have gone past, I'm very happy to see that there are a lot of women that are making the lumber and building materials industry their career. And you know, as we grow and develop, we are still looking at, in terms of, we looked at the whole industry across, the representation for women in the industry is still way less than 1%. So, you know, I think there's a few of us that are in my position that are realizing, hey, there's something that we can do. There's something that we can reach a hand out and we can help mentor. We can get these programs together. Because as I look at women and their roles in the industry, I see a lot of administrative. I myself started as a credit manager for Georgia Pacific in 1990. This industry was not something that I ever thought that I would be going into. It wasn't even on my radar. Mm-hmm. And the only reason that I was got into it, and I think a lot of people that are in the industry can tell you the same thing, it was by happenstance. And it's a wonderful industry, but it has a branding problem. It's not an industry that people may think about going into, and especially women in particular, because there are still women in, you know, the admin positions like credit management or clerical, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But the purpose of this table is to show women, let women know that there are amazing opportunities in this industry, and you can have a fantastic career and, you know, lead by example. And there are other women that are going to be joining me from all across the U.S. at this roundtable. And this is something that we want to continue to grow, and we want to build this. And we're starting out smaller this year, but as our collective voice grows, you know, to bring people together. And it isn't about, well, I'm a woman and you're a man and this is how we operate differently. It's learning to develop our leadership skills and use our voices and make a positive impact in our industry, because from sales to management to executive positions, there are